July 17, 1996. A plane takes off into the night. Everything seems normal, calm, routine. Passengers are relaxed. Some are talking. Others are looking out the window at the lights of New York fading behind them. It's just another flight, just another journey across the Atlantic. But then, in a single moment, everything changes. A sudden flash lights up the sky, followed by a massive explosion. No warning, no distress call, no time to react. Within seconds, the aircraft disappears, and 230 lives are lost forever. On the ground, people stare into the sky in shock. Some say they saw a bright streak of light rising toward the plane. Others describe a fireball tearing the aircraft apart midair. What they saw didn't look like an ordinary accident. This was TWA Flight 800, one of the most mysterious aviation disasters in history. The official explanation was simple: a fuel tank explosion. But for many, that explanation was never enough. Because the question still remains: what really happened in the sky that night? Was it a tragic mechanical failure, or something far more disturbing? A hidden truth, a missed detail, or something no one wanted to reveal? TWA Flight 800 was a Boeing 747 that took off from New York on July 17, 1996, heading to Paris, but just 12 minutes after takeoff, it suddenly exploded over the Atlantic Ocean, killing all 230 people on board. Nearly 3 decades later, the mystery is still alive. And tonight, we're going to uncover the story, piece by piece. So, let's find out what really happened. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. July 17, 1996. A warm summer evening in New York City. At John F. Kennedy International Airport, everything seemed completely normal. Passengers boarded a routine international flight, families heading to vacation, students traveling abroad, crew members preparing for another ordinary journey across the Atlantic. The aircraft was TWA Flight 800, a Boeing 747 bound for Paris. At 8:19 p.m., the plane took off smoothly into the evening sky, climbing higher and higher above the coastline of Long Island. For a few minutes, everything was exactly as expected. And then, something went terribly wrong. Without warning, without distress calls, without any clear sign of trouble, a sudden, violent explosion lit up the sky. Witnesses on the ground froze in shock as they watched a massive fireball tear through the darkness. Some described it as a streak of light rising toward the aircraft. Others said they saw glowing fragments falling from the sky like burning debris. Within seconds, the plane was gone. 230 people disappeared into the Atlantic Ocean. What happened in those final moments? Was it a catastrophic mechanical failure hidden deep within the aircraft? Or was it something far more disturbing, something no one wanted to admit? In the days that followed, investigators launched one of the most complex aviation investigations in history. They would eventually reach a conclusion, but not everyone believed it, because dozens of eyewitnesses told a very different story. A story of strange lights, unexplained objects, and a possibility that this was no accident at all. Nearly 3 decades later, the mystery of TWA Flight 800 still raises questions. Questions about what really happened, what was seen that night, and whether the full truth was ever revealed. Tonight, we're going to take a closer look at one of the most controversial aviation disasters in modern history. This is the story of TWA Flight 800 and the mystery that still haunts it. To understand what really happened that night, we need to go back to the beginning. TWA Flight 800 was a scheduled international flight operated by Trans World Airlines, one of the major American carriers of its time. On July 17, 1996, The aircraft assigned to this flight was a Boeing 747, one of the most iconic and widely used long-haul airplanes in aviation history. It was designed for long-distance travel, built to carry hundreds of passengers safely across continents and oceans. That evening, the flight was set to depart from John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York, heading toward its destination, Paris, France. A routine route, flown countless times before, with no indication of danger. On board were 230 people, including passengers and crew. Among them were families beginning their summer vacations, students traveling abroad, and experienced crew members who had performed this journey many times. For them, this flight was just another trip, another crossing over the Atlantic. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. At the time, the aviation industry in the 1990s was considered one of the safest forms of transportation. Airlines operated under strict safety regulations, with regular inspections, maintenance procedures, and highly trained flight crews. Aircraft like the Boeing 747 had built a strong reputation for reliability and safety over decades of service. Passengers trusted the system, and incidents like this were extremely rare. Trans World Airlines, or TWA, had been a major name in aviation for decades. Founded in the early 20th century, it played a key role in shaping commercial air travel in the United States. By the 1990s, although facing financial challenges, the airline was still operating international routes and carrying thousands of passengers every day. Flight 800 was just one of many flights in its daily schedule. As the aircraft prepared for departure, everything followed standard procedure. Passengers boarded, luggage was loaded, and the crew completed final checks. On a map, the route was simple, departing from New York, crossing the Atlantic Ocean, and arriving in Paris hours later. A journey that should have been smooth and uneventful. But sometimes, even the most routine flights can take a tragic and unexpected turn. Because just minutes after takeoff, this ordinary journey would become one of the most shocking aviation disasters in history. Just minutes after takeoff, TWA Flight 800 was climbing steadily over the Atlantic Ocean, near the coast of Long Island. Everything appeared normal. The aircraft was gaining altitude, systems were functioning, and there were no distress signals from the cockpit. Then, at approximately 8:31 p.m., something unexpected happened. A sudden, powerful explosion tore through the aircraft. In an instant, the night sky was illuminated by a massive fireball. The Boeing 747 broke apart in midair, scattering debris across the dark waters below. Investigators would later reconstruct the event, showing how the front section of the plane separated violently, followed by the rest of the fuselage breaking apart. Burning fragments fell from the sky, leaving trails of light as they descended into the ocean. On the ground, dozens of eyewitnesses watched in shock. People along the shoreline of Long Island reported seeing something unusual just seconds before the explosion. Some described a bright streak of light rising upward toward the aircraft. Others said they saw a sudden flash, followed by what looked like a fireball in the sky. One witness later said, "I saw bright lights, then a fireball." Another reported, "It looked like pieces were flying in different directions." These accounts quickly spread, raising serious questions about what had really happened. Were these just misinterpretations of the explosion itself? Or did they point to something else entirely? The idea that something may have struck the aircraft, or triggered the explosion externally, began to take hold. And as more witnesses came forward with similar stories, the mystery only deepened. Because what they described didn't fully match a simple mechanical failure. Instead, it opened the door to one of the most debated and controversial questions surrounding TWA Flight 800. What did people really see in the sky that night? In the aftermath of the disaster, a massive investigation was launched. Leading the effort was the National Transportation Safety Board, also known as the NTSB, the primary agency responsible for investigating civil aviation accidents in the United States. Working alongside them were the FBI, aviation experts, engineers, and forensic teams, all focused on answering one critical question. What caused TWA Flight 800 to explode? The investigation quickly became one of the most complex in aviation history. Wreckage from the aircraft was recovered piece by piece from the ocean floor. Over time, investigators reconstructed large sections of the plane, carefully analyzing every fragment for clues. After years of detailed analysis, the NTSB reached its official conclusion. The explosion was caused by the ignition of fuel vapors inside the aircraft's center fuel tank. According to the report, a short circuit in the wiring likely created a spark, which ignited the highly flammable mixture of air and fuel vapor inside the tank. To understand this, we need to look at how the aircraft was designed. The Boeing 747 has a center fuel tank located between the wings. On that day, the tank contained a relatively low level of fuel, which allowed a dangerous mixture of fuel vapor and air to form inside. Under the right conditions, this mixture becomes highly explosive. Investigators believe that faulty or aging wiring, possibly combined with heat from the air conditioning system below the tank, created the conditions for ignition. Once the spark occurred, the explosion was immediate and catastrophic. In its final report, the NTSB stated, "The probable cause of the TWA Flight 800 accident was an explosion of the center fuel tank, resulting from ignition of the flammable fuel-air mixture." This explanation was supported by physical evidence, laboratory testing, and extensive simulations conducted during the investigation. No traces of explosives or missile fragments were officially confirmed. To prevent similar accidents in the future, new safety measures were introduced. These included improved wiring inspections, changes in fuel tank design, and systems to reduce flammable vapors inside aircraft tanks. For investigators, the case was closed. A tragic accident caused by a rare but deadly mechanical failure. But for many people, the story didn't end there, because despite the official findings, questions still remained, especially when compared to what eyewitnesses claimed to have seen that night. And that's where the controversy truly begins. Even after the official investigation concluded, not everyone was convinced. For many, the explanation of a fuel tank explosion didn't fully explain what they believed they saw that night. And that's when the alternative theories began to spread. One of the most widely discussed theories was the possibility of a missile strike. Dozens of eyewitnesses reported seeing what looked like a streak of light rising into the sky just seconds before the explosion. Some described it as fast, bright, and moving upward, almost like something launched from the ground. To them, it didn't look like a mechanical failure. It looked like something hit the plane. Another theory suggested that a bomb may have been placed on board. In the mid-1990s, aviation security was a growing concern, and the idea of an onboard explosive device was not impossible. This led to early involvement from the FBI, who initially treated the case as a potential criminal investigation. But perhaps the most controversial theory of all was the idea of a military cover-up. Some believed that a missile test or military exercise had gone wrong, and that the truth was intentionally hidden from the public. According to this theory, what witnesses saw in the sky was not an illusion, but evidence. As these ideas spread, the media quickly picked up the story. Television reports, newspaper headlines, and later documentaries began exploring these possibilities. Interviews with eyewitnesses added more fuel to the debate, each account reinforcing the sense that something didn't add up. Public opinion became divided. Some trusted the official findings, believing the evidence clearly pointed to a mechanical cause. Others remained skeptical, questioning inconsistencies and focusing on what they believed were overlooked details. And even years later, documentaries and independent investigations continued to challenge the official narrative. They revisited eyewitness testimonies, reanalyzed evidence, and raised new questions about what might have been missed or ignored. So why did these theories persist for so long? Part of the answer lies in human nature. When a tragedy happens without clear warning, people search for meaning, for explanations that feel complete. And when answers don't satisfy everyone, doubt begins to grow. In the case of TWA Flight 800, the combination of conflicting eyewitness reports, technical complexity, and the scale of the disaster created the perfect environment for speculation. A mystery that refused to fade. But beyond the theories, beyond the debates, there is still the reality of what was lost that night, and the lasting impact it had on aviation, safety, and the families of those on board. Because whether it was an accident or something more, the questions surrounding TWA Flight 800 are still being asked to this day. In the days and weeks following the disaster, the world watched in shock. Search and recovery teams worked tirelessly in the waters off Long Island, trying to recover debris and bring closure to the families of those on board. But beyond the investigation, beyond the theories, there were real people, real lives, and real families forever changed by what happened that night. For the families of the 230 victims, the loss was immediate and devastating. Parents lost children, children lost parents, and loved ones were taken without warning. Many gathered near the crash site, holding on to hope in the early days, and later, holding on to memories. Memorials were created to honor those who lost their lives. Names etched in stone, overlooking the ocean where the aircraft went down. A place of silence, reflection, and remembrance. At a national level, the tragedy deeply affected public confidence in air travel. For many, it raised a difficult question. If something like this could happen without warning, how safe is flying? In response, aviation authorities took action. New safety regulations were introduced, focusing on preventing fuel tank explosions. Aircraft manufacturers began redesigning fuel tank systems to reduce the risk of flammable vapor buildup. Wiring inspections became more strict, and new technologies were developed to improve safety. These changes would go on to influence aircraft design for years to come, making modern aviation even safer. Lessons learned from this tragedy helped prevent future disasters. But the impact of TWA Flight 800 wasn't only technical. It also changed the way people think. The combination of a sudden disaster, conflicting eyewitness accounts, and lingering questions gave rise to something else. A lasting culture of doubt. A belief, for some, that not all answers are fully revealed. Over time, the story of TWA Flight 800 became more than just an aviation accident. It became a symbol of mystery, debate, and the search for truth. A case often referenced whenever questions arise about transparency, investigations, and what we choose to believe. But behind every theory, every headline, every debate, there are still 230 lives that were lost, and families who continue to remember them, not as part of a mystery, but as people who never came home. And perhaps that is the most important part of this story. So, after everything we've seen, the investigation, the evidence, the eyewitness accounts, and the theories, we're left with one final question. Was it just a tragic accident, or is there more than meets the eye? The official report gives us answers, clear, detailed, and supported by evidence. But the doubts, the questions, and the stories from that night, they still remain. And maybe that's what makes this case so unforgettable. Because sometimes, even when we have answers, they don't feel like the whole truth. Now I want to hear from you. What do you think really happened to TWA Flight 800? Do you believe the official explanation? Or do you think there's something more behind the story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this video interesting, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more mysteries like this. Because even after all these years, new theories, new discussions, and even new documents continue to appear, keeping the mystery alive. And until the full truth is known, the story of TWA Flight 800 remains unsolved.